This is the war they never taught us, a war where brothers became enemies, where a nation was split in two, where over 1 million people died, not by bullets, but by hunger. This is the Biafran War. Before we begin, if you believe African history must be told by Africans, subscribe now to African Stories with Drey, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The 1960s began with joy. Nigeria had just gained independence from Britain, a new nation pulsing with life, a vibrant mosaic of more than 250 ethnic groups united under one flag. In Lagos, Ibadan, Enugu, and Kano, the streets were alive. Markets bustled with commerce, trains stitched the vast country together, and the laughter of children echoed from newly built schools. Hope was the currency of the day, a dream of a powerful, unified African giant taking its place on the world stage. But beneath the jubilant celebrations, old tensions slept like fire beneath ashes. The political elite, drawn mainly from the three largest ethnic groups, the Hausa Fulani of the north, the Yoruba of the west, and the IGBO of the east, competed for control of the new nation's soul and its resources. Power was a delicate balance, and soon that balance began to crack. Ethnic suspicion, once a quiet whisper, grew into a deafening roar. In the corridors of power and the pages of newspapers, rumors spread like wildfire, fueling division and mistrust. Each region felt its interests were being threatened by the others. The north feared southern domination of the bureaucracy and economy. The south feared the north's political dominance due to its larger population. It was a nation walking a tightrope, unaware of the chasm below. And then, in the cold dawn of a January morning, everything exploded. January 15th, 1966. A group of young, idealistic military officers, led primarily by Major Chukwuma Kaduna, launched Nigeria's first-ever military coup. They moved with precision in the darkness, seizing key installations and targeting the nation's top political leaders. Their stated goal was to end the corruption that was crippling the young nation and to create a more unified Nigeria. But their actions would have the opposite effect. When the sun rose, the country awoke to a new reality. The Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, a northerner, was gone. The powerful Premier of the North, Sir Ahmadu Bello, gone. The Premier of the Western region, Samuel Akintola, gone. The list of casualties was long, but it was the pattern that sent a shockwave of fear and anger across the country. The coup plotters were mostly IGBO officers, and the highest-ranking politicians who had been killed were almost all from the north and west. 2 million of northerners. This was not a revolution against corruption. It was an IGBO plot to seize control of Nigeria. The fact that the coup ultimately failed to take full control did not matter. The seeds of vengeance were sown. In the ensuing power vacuum, the highest-ranking military officer, Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, an IGBO, took control of the nation. He tried to restore order and unify the country, but his unification decree, which abolished the federal system in favor of a unitary state, was seen by many northerners as the final confirmation of an IGBO takeover. The air grew thick with tension. The nation held its breath. 6 months after the first coup, a second one, far more brutal, was unleashed. He too would fall. July 29, 1966. Northern soldiers, fueled by a thirst for revenge, struck back. It began as a mutiny in the army barracks of Abeokuta, but it quickly spiraled into a coordinated counter-coup. General Aguiyi Ironsi was captured and killed. The sound of gunfire echoed across the country, not just in military barracks, but in the streets of northern cities. In the chaos that followed, a wave of horrific violence was unleashed against IGBO civilians living in the north. Tens of thousands were killed in pogroms. Homes were burned, businesses were looted, and families were torn apart. The violence was indiscriminate and savage. The country was hemorrhaging. A great exodus began. IGBO families, who had lived in the north for generations, fled for their lives, leaving everything behind. Trains and trucks were packed with traumatized refugees, all heading back to the relative safety of the eastern region. Mothers clutching their children searched desperately for missing sons and husbands. The East, governed by Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, was overwhelmed by the flood of broken, grieving people. Ojukwu demanded justice from the new federal government, now led by a young northern officer, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon. He called for security for his people, but peace was slipping away, like sand through desperate fingers. The trust that once bound Nigeria together was gone, replaced by blood and fear. After months of failed peace talks, including a summit in Aburi, Ghana, the breaking point was reached. Ojukwu felt he had no choice. He believed the Nigerian state could no longer protect his people. On May 30, 1967, after consulting with the leaders of the eastern region, he made a fateful declaration in a radio broadcast that would change African history forever. The eastern region seceded from Nigeria, and the world heard a new name for the first time, the Republic of Biafra. Crowds poured into the streets of Enugu, the new capital, waving palm fronds and cheering for their newfound freedom. Ojukwu proclaimed that his people, after suffering unimaginable persecution, had a fundamental right to live, a right to safety, and a right to self-determination. But in Lagos, Nigeria's leader, General Yakubu Gowon, declared the move an illegal act of rebellion. The unity of Nigeria, he vowed, was not negotiable. There was only one path left: war. On July 6, 1967, the Nigerian federal government launched what it called a police action. The official belief was that the rebellion would be crushed within weeks. The Nigerian army advanced on two fronts, targeting the Biafran University town of Nsukka and the city of Ogoya. The first shots had been fired. What was meant to be a swift operation quickly turned into a brutal, grinding war. The Biafran soldiers, though vastly outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a fierce and desperate determination. They were young, poorly equipped, and often armed with little more than courage and homemade weapons. Yet they resisted with everything they had, defending every inch of their land. They developed their own ingenious mines, known as ogbanig, and repaired old colonial-era rifles. This was not a police action. It was a full-scale conflict, a battle for survival. Then, in a move that stunned the world, Biafra struck back. In August 1967, a Biafran column, led by Colonel Victor Banjo, launched a shocking counterattack. They marched swiftly across the Niger Bridge into the Midwest region, a territory they hoped would join their cause. City after city fell with little resistance. Benin City, the capital of the Midwest, was captured. For a brief, electrifying moment, it seemed Biafra might win. The Biafran army advanced as far as Ore, a town in the western region that stood as the gateway to Lagos, the Nigerian capital. Nigeria panicked. The world watched in disbelief. But the audacious dream of capturing Lagos collapsed. The advance stalled at Ore, and the Nigerian army, regrouping with overwhelming force, began the long, bloody pushback. Unable to secure a swift military victory, Nigeria shifted its strategy to a far more cruel and effective weapon. A total blockade was imposed on Biafra, by land, by sea, and by air. The young republic was sealed off from the rest of the world. No food could get in, no medicine, no trade, no relief. The Nigerian government's policy was clear: starve the rebellion into submission. The markets, once filled with yams and cassava, grew empty. The laughter of children faded into the silent, hollow-eyed stare of hunger. It was not bullets that would ultimately break Biafra's will to fight, but starvation. For the first time in modern African history, the images of starving children, their bellies swollen from kwashiorkor, filled newspapers and television screens around the world. The war became an international humanitarian crisis. The world was forced to react. France, seeing an opportunity to weaken a British-aligned Nigeria, sent covert support to Biafra. But Britain, with its vast oil interests, backed the Nigerian federal government with weapons and diplomatic support. The Soviet Union also supplied Nigeria with fighter jets. Caught in the middle of this Cold War proxy game, the Organization of African Unity sided with Nigeria, prioritizing national unity over the cries of secession. In the face of the blockade, a massive humanitarian airlift began. Brave foreign pilots, flying for church groups and relief agencies, risked their lives every night, landing cargo planes filled with food and medicine on a converted roadway in the Biafran jungle known as the Yuli airstrip. For a time, it was the busiest nighttime airport in the world. a fragile lifeline in a sea of darkness. Despite the heroic airlift and the fierce resistance of its soldiers, Biafra was slowly being strangled. By 1969, the Nigerian army had captured most of Biafra's major towns, including Port Harcourt, which cut off access to the sea, and the capital, Enugu. The territory of the breakaway republic shrank daily, a small pocket of resistance surrounded by a sea of federal troops. The suffering of the civilian population reached unimaginable levels. Finally, facing total military collapse, Oyuku fled the country, officially to seek peace negotiations. On January 15, 1970, exactly 3 years after the surrender of the first coup plotters, Ojaku's second-in-command, Philip Ifeanyi, broadcast the surrender of Biafra. The war was over, the guns fell silent, but the wounds remain. In his victory speech, General Gowan declared a policy of no victor, no vanquished. He called for reconciliation, reconstruction, and reintegration. A general amnesty was granted to most who had fought for Biafra. The process of rebuilding began. Slowly, the IGBO people, who had lost their savings when Biafran currency was nullified, and every bank account was credited with only 20 Nigerian pounds, began the arduous task of piecing their lives back together. The Biafran War changed Nigeria forever. It reshaped its politics, redrew its internal boundaries into a system of smaller states, and left a deep emotional scar on the national psyche. And yet, so much of this history remains untold. So many stories are locked away in the quiet memories of the survivors, waiting to be heard. If you believe these stories must be told, if you believe African history deserves a voice, then subscribe to African Stories with Drey and join us as we uncover the past they never taught us.